Psalm 66 is the first psalm in Book 2 that is not titled. We had the sons of Korah, Psalms 42 through 49, Song of Asaph, 50, and then from 51 to 65, we've had Psalms of David. Because this one is untitled and we don't have any specific details in the psalm itself that date it, what we assume is it probably has to do with a celebration of deliverance in battle, perhaps the Assyrian invasion of 701 BC, or perhaps even later with the return from exile. We don't really know, but it does seem to be a hymn that would have been used at the religious festivals. That would put it in the context of the other psalms that are around it. Psalms 55 through 68 form a group of 4 hymns that would have likely been used during times of festivals, the Passover, the Pentecost, Tabernacles, the 3 great agricultural feasts. This likely was one of those hymns that was used at that time. It's a very exuberant call to worship, and as we've noted in Psalm 65, these 4 psalms all have hints of the nations, of a missionary flavor to them. And so here you have it in verse 1 and again in verse 4, shout for joy, all the earth. So we're talking not just about the Jewish people, but all peoples invited to worship God and to declare in verse 3, how awesome are your deeds. It's kind of echoes of Psalm 65 there as well. And the singing that's enjoined at this point. So an exuberant call to worship that's going to be even more prominent in Psalms 93 through 100. So this is a little bit of a peek at what's ahead in the Psalter. Notice that this first stanza may be characterized as a call to worship their God, describing what God has done for the people. It says in verse 5, come and see what God has done, his awesome deeds toward the children of man. He turned the sea to dry land. They passed through the river on foot. So this could be reference to the Exodus, the crossing of the Red Sea, and then the river being the Jordan River as the nation entered into the land of Canaan in the days of Joshua. And there did we rejoice in him who rules by his might forever, whose eyes keep watch on the nations. There's another reference to the nations. Let not the rebellious exalt themselves. So the worshipers are invited to remember the Exodus. It was the formative event in the history of the nation of Israel. And that event and the entry into the land of Canaan were 2 things that they were remembering and celebrating. The command in verse 8 is to bless our God, O peoples. There again, another reference to peoples, to the nations. Let the sound of his praise be heard. What's he done? He's kept our soul among the living. He has not let our feet slip. And you see the word our. So you, O God, have tested us. You've tried us. So this is moved to first person singular. Oh, you have tested us. You tried us as silver, refined us through trial. You've brought us into the net. You laid a crushing burden on our backs. This is probably a reference, the net of slavery, the burden of building with brick and mortar in Egypt. You let men ride over our heads, the taskmasters. We went through fire and water. The fire probably referring to the iron furnace that was Egypt and their slavery there, just as you've tested us as silver. That's the fire. And then the water, a reference to the crossing of the Red Sea. What an experience that was, to be backed up against the water, and then a way is made, and it must have still been rather frightening to walk through the water, knowing that at any minute the waters could return and drown you. So just taking them back to this incredible moment in their history where they went through fire of trials and through the waters of the Red Sea, and you brought us to a place of abundance. That's the promised land, the land of Canaan. And again, echoes of Psalm 65 there, where it talked about the land being so bountiful. The third section of this psalm could be characterized as being about my God. The psalmist gets personal here and says, I will come into your house with burnt offerings. I'll perform my vows. And he goes on to describe the various offerings that he will make. And again, certainly fits if this is a psalm for an agricultural religious festival. And then he, in turn, invites others to come and hear. In the previous verse, it was come and see, right? And now it's come and hear, all you who fear God, and I will tell you what he's done for my soul. and he gives his own personal testimony. I worshipped him, and if I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. When we separate ourselves through sin from relationship with God, it's not that God, doesn't hear us, but he can't bless a life, an activity that is outside of his will. It doesn't work that way. I think that's the sense of this. Certainly God hears and knows everything, but his blessing is going to be limited if we have not aligned our life with his ways. But the Lord has listened. He's attended to the voice of my prayer. Notice all the references there to listening and hearing, verses 16 through 19. And then the command was to bless our God, back in verse 8. And now it is, blessed be God. He's not rejected my prayer, removed his steadfast love for me, linking this back together. So it's a call to worship God, and it's a personal testimony of the psalmist's worship as well. And then we notice, again, some similarities with Psalm 65. There are some similar words that you can track between the two psalms. And Psalm 65 is praise for God's deeds on the earth, while Psalm 66 is praise for God's deeds for Israel and for the psalmist himself. So the God of creation, and then the God of the nation, Israel, and a recitation of how God brought them through fire and water and into an abundant land and a place of blessing.